Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike McGinley, and I'm your host for this coming hour. Welcome to SIA Lexington Concord's Fireside Chat with PEO Digital and friends. We have a fantastic lineup for you here today with Mr. Wirt, Mr. Steve Wirt, Mr. Kevin Stamey, Mr. John Vona, and Brigadier General Paul Murray. To our audience members, many of you joined us at New Horizons, and we welcome you back. But we want to let all of you know that you can ask questions at any time via the question and answer button at the bottom of your screens. So to get things moving, we have 1 hour. We have a lot to fit in. Let me hand it over to our panelists, beginning with Mr. Wirt for introductions. Mr. Wirt, over to you.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Wirt, PEO Digital. As I briefed at New Horizons, I manage a portfolio of programs. And to do that, I work closely with these folks who are on with me. In this case, Kevin Stamey, who is the Capability Director working for Honorable Hunter, and then John Vona at ACC, who's my partner in crime with respect to MAGCOM requirements, and then Brigadier General Paul Dino Murray out at NORAD Northcom, who is the roughly a ConOps lead on numerous of our programs. So a great partnership that we get to demonstrate for you today. I won't talk further because if you are on at New Horizons, you got a good flavor of what I do. Thanks, Mike.
Mr. Stamey?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Steve, for inviting me to the Fireside Chat, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with my friends. So you and John and General Murray, and what I thought I'd talk about, just some opening remarks or kind of a major initiative for me, probably one of the biggest things in my portfolio that the four of us collaborate on, and that is air and cruise missile defense of the homeland. And I think it might be relevant to some of your audience and the participants there, both on the government industry side. So I just thought I'd share a little thoughts as an illustrative example of the kinds of things we partner on. And so just as background, last July, Deputy SecDef designated the Air Force as the acquisition lead for air and cruise missile defense of the homeland. And frankly, we're still trying to get our heads around all the things that means to us. But previously, that mission set for AMCDH fell under the Missile Defense Agency. The department felt that MDA was really better equipped and focused on the ballistic missile piece of that. And the Air Force was probably a better fit based on the kind of the things that we're working on for the air and cruise missile piece of that threat. So as such, I got handed with the task of building the architecture for air and cruise missile defense of the homeland. And kind of the first task out of the chute was to identify the gaps across the services to provide that end-to-end kill chain. And as you might imagine, that is a huge undertaking. It is eating an elephant that requires very close collaboration with Steve, John, and General Murray organizations, as well as INDOPACOM, MDA, and the other services. And what makes it a real challenge for the Air Force is the Air Force owns many of the relevant sensors, some of the command and control elements, but we don't, for instance, own most of those defeat mechanisms. And we certainly don't own a complete C2 component for that. And frankly, none of the services own all of it. And certainly there's no single service that owns any one piece of this problem set. So the Air Force will then have to figure out how we integrate this multi-service systems of systems. Then you layer on top of that just the complexity of the system itself. You layer on top of that the threat. As we face this new and evolving threat in this great power competition, we have multiple types of threats, whether they're cruise missiles, low-flying stealth cruise missiles, whether they're hypersonics. Those threats are evolving, and frankly, the Department of Defense is kind of behind the power curve and being in an uncomfortable situation of having to accelerate this capability to protect the homeland. And we've got to kind of balance how we address these near-term threats today, but also, how we put ourselves on the path without being economically unwise to make sure we're on the path to also address that future threat. And so as these threats, just as a for example, as these threats evolve, they get faster, they get more stealthier. So it makes the problem harder for us. In sort of bottom line, it decreases our reaction time. So we have to think about how do we get after that? We either have to have sensors that are more capable of detecting things farther out. So one of the things we're doing is over the horizon radar that can detect a lot of these targets a long ways out to give us better time to react. But we also have to think about, all right, the end effectors themselves. Do we have to have longer range? Do we have to be able to detect targets quickly? But the other thing that we're thinking about in the solution is you can just imagine in a very short time frame where you got a sub off the coast that launches something, the time frame between that launch and our decision for an operator, a man in the loop to make a critical decision is very short. And the more that we can take off their plate and just decision making, the more we can decrease the clutter of information that they have to make a decision and potentially introduce AI. So all they have to do is, no kidding, push a button, the better we'll be. And I know this audience is interested in things like command and control. Our focus right now is kind of the domain awareness piece, but we are absolutely looking at, well, domain awareness is just one piece of this, and how do we get after the command and control front? And the Air Force has a big piece of that. If you're not tracking, Steve, you may have talked about this at New Horizon, but we've stood up a new integrating PEO called C3BM. One of the things they own that's going to be critical to this is something called cloud-based C2. Right now, that's going to be the foundation of our architecture as we move forward. But as we put flesh on the bones of this program, we'll need ideas and innovation from industry so that we can do this quickly. We don't have a lot of time to solve this problem. We're already behind the power curve. And again, thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to taking your questions on this or any other of the questions you might have. So back to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Stamey. You have your hands full, and I think we're going to dive deep into some of these issues and complexities that relate to the OIs during this call. But before then, over to you, Mr. Vona.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is John Vona from ACC. I'm General Job's deputy is in the 589 year, which is plans, programs, and requirements. So as Steve said, I work with him and a number of his peer PEOs every day on modernization and sustainment of current weapon systems that span everything from fighters and munitions, command and control, ISR, cyber, personnel recovery. So we have our hands full with those programs, but very fortunately at the same time, we're looking at a top line increase that's going to help us with some of the threats that Kevin talked about. And if we look at the new NDS as our guide, both Homeland Defense and the importance of that and our continued commitments to the other COCOMs out there, we've got our hands full, and we're fortunate that we have the SecAf's OIs as a vehicle to work on our modernization strategies and crystallize new programs and initiatives that are going to help us get after that quickly. So we're in a good position right now because we're increasing the health of some of our programs. Many of those programs you're our key partners on, our audience today, but we also need your help as we're planning for the future. So I think that's a lot of what this dialogue is about today, and I'm looking forward to having the conversation. I would tell you this is a very tight-knit team. So Mike, good luck with riding herd on us as we're having our conversations. We regularly have sessions like this, almost weekly, on the variety of programs we work together. So today we're kind of inviting you to one of our sessions. So thanks for your attendance and looking forward to a good conversation.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Mr. Vona. That's fantastic. All right, Brigadier General Murray, over to you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo John's last point. In many ways, this is like same guys, different bar for us. because we see each other so often. As the deputy J3 at on the NORAD side of the house for NORAD and Northcom, I actually wear multiple hats. One of them is just that, deputy J3, just for the NORAD operations. So whether that's current operations, next 96 hours, and into the near future, things like Homeland Defense campaigning, that's a big part of what I do. In fact, you guys saved me today. I got to see the sun because we're in the middle of an exercise where we're participating with Stratcom and Global Thunder, and I was able to get out of the mountain and come to my normal office to be here with you. So thank you for that. So I'll stretch this out as long as I can because I do have to go back. But that's one of my hats. And my other hat, though, I do for the entire command, both NORAD and Northcom. And we can talk if there's any questions about the distinction there. But and that is really as kind of the integrator across the staff for the commander's concepts. And one of the biggest concept is his concept for Homeland Defense design. We've got it broken out into 3 epics: a 2025 epic, a 2030 epic, and then a 2035 epic. And we've varying degrees of detail in each of those that we'll lay down. And I look forward to talking about each of those and relate them to the work that my three partners in crime here have started talking about. 3 big ideas in the Homeland Defense design that may spark some questions for you later on, some interest. The first one is integrated layered defense. So in this way, we know that Homeland Defense does not start at home. It starts in what we call the forward layer. That's our partners in Indo-PACOM, that's EUCOM, and that's a big part of the operational imperatives that we'll talk about today. But we also see an approach layer, meaning not only do we rely on those forward combatant commanders to take care of threats before they ever get to the homeland, but we know that those threats, as they transit to the homeland, we have to work with those same partners to maintain custody and attrit those forces in the approach layer, again, before they ever get to the homeland layer. And then, of course, the third layer is the homeland layer. And this is where things like ACMDH and other things become very important as we go forward. That's big idea number 1, integrated layered defense. Big idea number 2 with the Homeland Defense design is persistent wide area domain awareness. Lots of things we can talk there, but again, the Air Force is one of our biggest partners in that, and the best example is over the horizon radar and the capability that provides to the command and will provide to the command as we go forward. I look forward to talking more about that. And then the third big idea is what we call persistent and proactive defense. And the best example of that is what Mr. Stamey talked about, and that is air and cruise missile defense of the homeland. We see that as kind of all of those concepts that he talked about as a big part of our CONOPS for defending the homeland in the homeland layer, at least from a cruise missile defense perspective. And with that, I'll stop there because I want to leave a lot of time for questions and where you and the team would like to go. But those are the major things that I work on here for the command and how I interact with my other 3 panel members. Steve, back over to you.
I'll actually pick it up because you were last, but we're not going to let you off the hook, sir. I'm going to come right back to you. Clearly you have your hands full. I think everyone here in this group certainly does. And it's great to hear the level of collaboration between all of you. Let me take you back a little bit in starting with General Murray and then open up to the group. Some of the things we talked about during New Horizons. So we learned that $5 billion in FY24 and $35 billion across the FIDA is going to be focused on the operational imperatives, the OIs. So, sir, again, starting with you, how has this increased your focus, or how's this increased focus on the OIs impacted your AOR? Really, and this is for all of you, right? For whether it's operational requirements or acquisition, that's a pretty high dollar value. How has it impacted you? Over.
Yeah, you bet. So we see a lot of power. We here in this joint, obviously joint and combined combatant command and our binational command on the NORAD side, we see a lot of power in the operational OIs, and we see ourselves very closely in really every single one of them. I will draw, everybody's attention to 3 that or to a couple of concepts and 3 of them that we really watch very closely. One is, right off the bat, when the secretary brought this out and the what and the why, he identified something that we believe is absolutely critical to our nation's security going forward. And that is this idea that the adversary is going to try to stop our power projection. And in many ways, the operational imperatives talk about power projection in the sense of, hey, getting combat or being able to employ combat power at the pointy edge. But we see it as getting that power projecting power from the homeland. And that's just a little bit different, right? So not only do you have to have the whole entire logistics capability to get it across the vast oceans and into the forward fight as it is, but you have to protect it before it even leaves the port here. And to us, that is an absolutely critical piece, because we know that while we do have forward-based forces, and perhaps in the future we'll have more in Indo-PACOM, the bulk of the fight is going to come from the homeland. And so that projection of power and protecting that is really that symbiotic relationship that we have with our forward layers. They're protecting us in the forward layer, they're defending the homeland, and we are protecting the force flow that's going to get to them to be able to do their job. So right off the bat, as in his what and why we see ourselves. The next one that I'll bring everybody's attention to is operational imperative 2, operationally focused ABMS. And I'll make 2 points there, and both of them kind of relate to the level of war. We focus on that operationally focused piece, because we know there's a lot of people working on the ABMS types of things, JADC2 types of things, and what we are trying to make sure that we drive these operational imperatives towards, and really the whole department is that it's not just about ABMS and the other efforts in the other services is not just about connecting sensors and shooters, integrated fire control. That's the most basic, very important, but a most basic kind of level of war. There has to be a C2 structure for the tactical level of war and the operational level of war that we see. And to be honest with you, we think there's also a place for this type of work at the strategic level of war. So operationally is where I work probably most with the rest of people on this panel, but we're watching very closely each of the services, particularly the Air Forces, all the way down, particularly down into connecting sensors and shooters. The next one is operational imperative, the resilient basing operational imperative. So here, a big part of what we think about is operations in the high north. And we know that that's not a very forgiving area up there. And so all these concepts like agile combat employment and things, we see a lot of the work that's being done in the OIs is very useful to how we are going to deter adversaries from attacking us from the high north. Right now, it's primarily Russia, but we know going forward in the future that China is investing in the Arctic and will employ weapon systems that will kind of come from that area. And so we see an important need to be able to operate up there, sometimes episodically, sometimes persistently, up in the high north and other places, and that requires resilient basing. The final one that I'll bring out, and this may be a good tie and transition for Mr. Vona, is readiness to deploy and fight. And for us in our command, NORAD and NORTHCOM don't have, or particularly NORTHCOM has no assigned forces, right? So we can't organize, train, equip them ourselves, like perhaps say USAFE or PACAF can, if you will. We count on the GFM process, the Global Force Management process, and our access to trained and ready forces. And again, I'll bring you to the Arctic. The extent that the services are building forces that are trained and operating, they're ready to deploy and fight in the high north, is one that we work very closely with our primary partner when it comes to the Air Force of Air Combat Command. So I could go on and talk about each of the other ones, but those are at least 3 of the areas where we most see ourselves fitting into the SECAF's OIs. Yeah,
thank you, sir. That's great. And Mr. Vona, you got a direct call out there. I think it was to OIs.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, well, this is my demanding customer at work. So I couldn't agree more with General Murray. I think we all understand what the threat is, the threat to the homeland being critically important. We've got to do something about it. We've got the pacing threat that we have to address. We're very fortunate that we were able to get a top line increase. And I think the OIs and the process that we've been using, an analytically driven process for making decisions, has been a key part of helping us tell our story, build those component pieces, how they all integrate, and what capabilities we need in what order. So, from the standpoint of the guy that works the boring MAGCOM process element of that, it's really helped us understand how our requirements flow across different capabilities and programs. But the very way that we're changing capability and evolving capability development is at the heart of this. The studies and analysis that we're bringing together, the opportunities for experimentation and risk reduction as a tool to help us ultimately define a minimum viable product that we have acquisition go after. And all these OIs, and General Murray only expressed a few of them, but they're all interrelated. They're all integrated in some way or another. These capabilities don't happen on their own. So we've had to spend a lot of time figuring out how to integrate our analysis, how to integrate our requirements, and how to integrate our programs. I think one other, there's always challenges. We have an opportunity now with the dollars that we've received as a result of the 24 increase. But one of the challenges this audience before you also faces is when we have the opportunity to start up new programs, we don't have a lot of time to do that. So getting those requirements actions done, getting that acquisition planning done, whether it be E7, F-15X, EX, OTHR, like the general talked about, we have a job that we're doing with our legendary programs. But we also have these new efforts that we're working hard to start up, and finding ways to streamline that process are critically important for us as we try to make good use of the taxpayers' dollars and get after these threats.
So
if I could,
actually,
so John
Kevin.
mentioned the analytical rigor behind our OIs, and that's actually been really key because there is analytical rigor. It wasn't just a philosophical discussion based on a near peer threat. There is analytical rigor that said, if we do this, it affects the outcome. And if you were to look in the OIs, just as a for instance, you wouldn't see the word crypto modernization necessarily embedded in there. But when we went through the analytical rigor that, hey, if you want to go against a near peer, your command and control and communication, and the foundation of that is one of the foundations is it has to be cryptographically secure. So in the 24 budget, the secretary specifically said, hey, we have too many weapon systems that have not addressed the crypto modernization necessary to go against a near peer. And there was a significant plus up in my portfolio, as well as the weapon system portfolios that have to integrate that capability on their airplane. And it was a difficult lift because it was a lot of money. I think it was in the neighborhood of $1 billion across the FIDF. So there was a lot of money that went into that just one thing. But it was very critical when you look at the analytical rigor that, hey, if we really want to do this, we've got to address crypto modernization.
if I can springboard off that, because that's part of OI7. And what OI7 is after is the realization that in a high-end fight, we may not even get out of garrison. At least the adversary is going to try and stop us. And so initially there was a lot of focus on crypto modernization, enterprise IT, tech debt, those IT-based and crypto-based areas. And part of that was who was leading that team. The good news for General Murray is in season 2, what analysis and recommendations are going forward now is a much richer look at what we really need to get after. For example, as the general pointed out, training to the high-end fight, which we don't do, supply chain visibility and supply chain risk management, logistics, command and control. So a lot of these things that you would want to be much more resilient than we are today, we can expect for industry partners interested in those areas, you can expect some new starts in FY25.
Thanks, sir, on that. And so I actually want to take that as a segue to my next question, right? And I want you to put yourselves in industry shoes, right? So clearly you're doing that. And let's start with Mr. Stamey on this one. So my first question here is going to have two parts, right? So the first is, how can industry better prepare, become more of a key component to the development of solutions related to the operational imperatives? Right? That's first. And the second is, what are your expectations of industry? I mean, there's a lot out here. It's pretty rich. What are your expectations? Help the folks online understand what you're looking for. Over.
Yeah, short answer is if your technology is relevant in this highly contested environment and gets after one of these operational imperatives, we're probably interested in hearing from you. And if you're not, and I don't mean to repeat what Steve already talked about, but if you're not aware, the key word in operational imperative or OIs is imperative. That means there's a timeline, and that timeline is within the FIDAP. So we don't have time to mature these exquisite technologies. What we're really looking for is things that can be matured, things that can be matured quickly, fielded quickly. So if there's a technology that's getting after that you think is already mature, that gets after an operational initiative, we're probably interested in hearing from you. And there's been a number of RFIs out to industry. We've had some industry days. I think Steve just participated in one this past week where we talked to some key industry folks. But to make sure we are, in fact, communicating with industry about where our needs exist, and for them to tell us where they think we potentially have some. So I think there's tons of opportunity for industry out there, but I would just say that the key is if you think that we're going to go spend a bunch of time and money on a major ACAT 1 program to get after some new technology, that's not where the Secretary's head is at. He's looking at really quick wins.
Hey, Kevin, if I could just pile onto that. First of all, I would say that industry's been a full participant throughout the OI process. I mean, you mentioned the OI or the RFIs that went out. I can tell you that we read every page of what came in against the ones that we were involved in. You know, beyond that, we're having increasing interaction with industry on opportunities. And so we really value the analysis that we see. For instance, we've seen a lot of analysis recently on CCAs and related capabilities, and of course, other areas too. But the more that we can learn about the analysis industry's done, the IRAD that's out there, and even the participation and experimentation around the globe, because we can't see everything. So those interactions, to me, from where I sit, from a requirements lens, are very valuable in helping us formulate our MVP of what's good enough, what we could have, that sort of thing. Over.
Yeah, just a few comments on on the latest industry event. So I'm just back from a 3-day operational imperative defense industrial base engagement at Joint Base Andrews, and the Secretary kicked that off in person. There were secret sessions, top secret sessions, and a SAP session with the Secretary for the C-suite representatives of the major primes. So hopefully, if you're in the audience, hopefully your company brought back information from that. The second part of this question is, is there working groups or experimentation efforts to flesh out next steps? I think we'll see a variety of approaches depending on what capability we're addressing. So I'll just bookend this a little bit. On the one hand, no secret here, weapons are definitely a growth area. we need more standoff weapons on rails. And so there are 6 new weapons programs in FY24, potentially more in 25, and we need increased production capacity. I mean, so fairly straightforward needs there, right? Not simple programs necessarily, but fairly straightforward what approach we're going to take there. We're going to get on with it as fast as possible. In other areas, and I'll pick an example in terms of sensing orchestration, track fusion, custody engine, the approach there, AFRL will be issuing a call for white papers, probably in the July timeframe, and they plan to award multiple OTAs by late this year to work several different prototypes. So we'll see efforts like modeling the sim, MBSC support, algorithms, track fusion type efforts, a variety of those. So I think we're going to see a lot of different approaches depending on which gap we're trying to fill. Over.
Solid. That's fantastic information.
Add one thing.
Yeah, and follow up, sir.
From the COCOM perspective, all of those we're watching very closely, and we agree. The other thing I'd ask industry is don't forget about the integration piece, the systems architecture piece. A lot of the briefings that I get are really great, interesting weapon systems, standalone, stovepiped. What we need is we need the bigs. We need everybody thinking about how are we integrating across that, across different companies, across different services, all the way. Because as Mr. Stamey said, for ACMDH is the perfect example. We see that solution set as a joint solution. It's not just going to be the Air Force organized, train, equipping, manning, buying, whatever it is that persistent or proactive defense is. It's going to be multiple organization, multiple services, multiple weapon systems, and integration is the area that I think we need to do a lot of work in. Over.
And Mr. Vona, I saw you nodding your head vigorously there. Do you want anything to add, or are you good with what General Murray said?
Well, obviously, I think as I look ahead, there's some other questions that talk about integration. But yeah, we're not interested in stovepipes. We're not interested in proprietary. We're interested in connecting the force. And we're not going to buy a lot of new things. We're going to connect a lot of the things that we have. That's what we're going to do in the near term. So we've got to figure out how to create architectures where we can either connect legacy, or as we architect the new, we can do it in a standards-based way. I'm actually finding from my requirements sheet that increasingly we're having to specify standards and interface requirements in a way that maybe we didn't in the past. And that's becoming more and more important for us because it's a connected fight.
That's interesting. I'm curious to see, and again, to the audience members, feel free to jump in and ask any questions. So what I hear you say is there's almost more requirements that may be coming through. If people aren't going to talk to each other, how do we make sure we're all from the same set of standards? Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to build on that. Again, feel free to jump in with questions to the audience. And I remember being a second lieutenant acquisition officer, and they said, hey, you can pick 2 out of any 3. You could get cost, you could get schedule, or you get performance, but you can't get all 3, right? And in advance of this, before we jumped online, we're having this conversation. Some of you may actually believe you can get to all 3. I might challenge you on that, but I would love to get a sense. Now we have the operational imperatives, right? So already in the conversation has come up, the key here is that it's imperative. We got to do this. So which of those 2, cost, schedule, performance, do we think the OIs drive us toward? Or if you think otherwise, how do we get to all 3? So Mr. Wirt, do you want to kick us off and see what you got?
I enjoy that. It's a pithy phrase, but in reality, we do think of it a little differently. One thing that we constantly think about is the government gets what the government incentivizes. And the question behind that is, are we intentionally incentivizing? Are we unintentionally incentivizing certain behaviors? So we do spend a lot of time trying to think that through, making sure we're not overly incentivizing either speed or capability or cost at the expense of the others. But fortunately, the Secretary addressed this question on Tuesday, at JBA. In his comments to industry, he said, we want best value. We don't want minimum value to meet minimum requirements. We want best values. So that tells us as the acquisition community to do that, we'll need to provide threshold requirements and objective requirements and have an evaluation approach that rewards performance beyond the threshold. Having said that, he also talked about his sense of urgency and how he doesn't want to be too late. Fielding all the capabilities we need to effectively deter China after they've already taken Taiwan doesn't help. So I think my interpretation of that question is we value speed and capability at a reasonable cost.
All right, that's a good swing. I like that. Who else wants to jump into the fray?
Yeah, so I'll put a different spin on that. So to Steve's point, I mean, when it comes to incentives, I mean, the cost schedule performance is often something we trade in how we incentivize somebody. But I don't necessarily agree that you can't get incredible capability quickly and at low cost. In fact, I would argue the longer it takes, the more it costs. And I'll give you this is a real example from my past. So I was part of ISR and SOF, and we had Big Safari. Big Safari did the initial development of MQ9 from scratch. You know, we basically took an MQ1 and said, hey, we need more gas. We need to carry more. And that was done in about 3 years that we started from scratch. And then we pulled it out of MQ9 and we tried to normalize it. We tried to normalize it. When I say normalize, we'd make it a traditional acquisition program. So we went from building the entire MQ9 in 3 years to we struggled to do a wingtip antenna mod, some power mods, and some other things. So what you would generally consider modifications to an existing platform. We struggled to get that done. And as I look back, I thought, wow, that was 7 years ago when we're just now doing that. And here's what I notice is we do things if we've got the right team with the right authorities, we can do things that are smart. But there are still a lot of things in our process that I would consider non-value added but required. And when we task industry, especially to do those things, and I'll just take General Atomics as an example. General Atomics, when we tried to normalize, didn't go hire a bunch of new people. They took the same people that were previously developing code, making designs, and we said, we want you to develop an aircraft structural integrity plan. We want you to help us develop a systems engineering plan. Well, at that point, it's too late. I mean, it's not adding a lot of value. It's not affecting the material solution when we do it after the fact. But it still cost money and it took us more time, yet it did not enable us to deliver more capability faster. So I think as acquisition professionals, we really have to think hard about the things that we ask industry to do and where are things that we're often required to do, whether or not they're really truly valuable, and if necessary, tailor them out of the program. So I think the answer is it depends. And I think there are some factors such as that you got to have an A team. When you got the A team, both on the government, the contractor side, with the right authorities, I think you can do amazing things effectively.
Hey, Kevin, if I could just jump onto that. I think to me, the phrase is, perfect is the enemy of good enough, right? And so when I've mentioned MVP a couple times in here, everything is software defined these days, and which lends itself towards the concepts of agile. So increasingly, I find the conversations I'm having with the PEOs I work with is about what's good enough for that initial increment that we can get out in the field quickly, and how do we build on it? So that's the way I look at it from a requirements perspective. And I think there's no doubt that many of the things that we're investing on as a result of the OIs we're going to need an additional investment to perfect them or scale them or whatever term we want to use. But I refer to it as a minimum viable product. Over.
General Murray.
That's exactly right. I'll just say our commander has a phrase of build the bike while we ride it. So whatever combination that we put those three in, get me a product now that I can start using. I can put these young, amazing airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, and Guardians on. They can figure it out better, that min viable product, than if you put it into the agile process, DevSecOps type of mentality quickly. Grows into something much more capable. If you wait for the perfect capability before you field it to the operators, it will be late to need in today's world.
And I think, and that's great, sir. And in the comments here, I think one of the keys is going to be communication, right, between government and industry, understanding that this is the expectation. Right? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We expect you to come in here, get that MVP, drive from that, and then iterate. But I think there will need to be increased communication between both sides. So industry has a sense of, yes, this is the expectation versus the exquisite system, because otherwise, if you've been told for 20 years, build that exquisite system, you tend to default toward that. Or, hey, what is my competitor going to do? Right. And so we talked about aligning incentives. I think communication is going to be the enabling oil to really bring all that together.
Hey, Mike, this is John. You just got me thinking about one other aspect of this. So there's many different methods for requirements. And when you look at programs like NGAD or CCAs now, some of our newer programs, one method that we've taken on those is starting at a very high level attribute level and describing that. And that allows for the trade space between the acquisition community and industry and ourselves about what are the harder problems, what could we have earlier. That's been very effective for us in some of these really technologically oriented things. And of course, we're the technical service that wants to attack the hard problems. So taking that approach has been working very well for us over the last 3 or 4 years since I've been in the seat here at ACC.
Well, that's great, sir. So I'm going to take that, and you're on the hook now for the next question, based on that comment. And so when we think about this, much of Mr. Wirt's portfolio is centered on battle management systems, as you know. For example, the Air Operations Center, the AOC. So during New Horizons a couple weeks ago, both retired General Holmes, Brigadier General Cropsey cited Gall's law, right? And that's the law that states a complex system that works is invariably found to evolve from a simple system that's worked, which sounds great, all well and good. However, as you very well know, right, we have an environment where we have many, many older systems. They're complex. They need to be redesigned, brought into today's environment with AI, et cetera. How does this all shake out? I mean, is this something that's even feasible?
Well, I perfectly well understand their comment, and I agree totally with the idea of eliminating complexity. I mean, that's one of the key tenets of Systems Engineering 101. And every problem that we approach, we should always look at that. How do we eliminate firewalls? How do we eliminate barriers? How do we eliminate cross-domain transfers? That's just an important aspect of it. And I also think, though, we have to set the overall framework in the architecture and what our target endpoint is, knowing that some of the newer things that we're building, we're going to design to that, and other things we might have to have gateways, or we might have to have ways to translate data while we, start to move those things out. So there's working the enterprise piece of it is very, very important. And of course, General Cropsey's on the hook to do that with his ABM SDI is one of the key enterprise investments that we're making for this C2 and BMC2 community. So, it's easy for us to say that, give me that small thing good enough now, but we also have to be thinking about the bigger framework and also the herding mechanism and the investments we need to make in some of our legendary or current programs to get the ones that need to cross the finish line and join the fight there.
Yeah, so definitely min viable product approaches, government reference architectures, and agile DevOps are keys here. And Kessel Run and other software efforts in general have adopted these approaches and simplified delivery, but also, modernization. And we're beginning to see this change our approach to more hardware-centric or hardware-intensive programs. So, for example, our initial contract for E7 is largely based on the UK production, which is in production today, the E7A, with minimal changes, those things that are mandates. But Open Mission System software is one of those changes that we're currently working on. For both the US and the Australians will then leverage that as well. Because as with all capabilities, we expect to modify E7 in the future. We think of hardware programs as a program with a beginning and an end. We flail at the end, proving that everything works perfectly, and we make it hard to deliver. And then the next thing we do is we modify that thing anyway, always. So I think there's an acceptance now that is not just how software programs will work, it's also how hardware programs will work.
Yeah, and I'll put maybe a different spin on it. So I think the quote kind of gets after a lot of things we do take this evolutionary approach where we take something that's already been proven to work and we continue to modify it and we make it more complex. So we start with something that worked and then we modify, and sometimes that's necessary. But I also think there are times that we have to think a revolutionary capability. So stealth, digital to analog, jet engine technology, I think those were all revolutionary capabilities rather than evolving something that already existed. I think there are cases where we need to just think outside the box and think about, do we need to think about this problem in a totally different perspective? And I'll just throw out a sore spot. Balloons. Who would have thought a balloon could be effective? A balloon it's really maybe a revolutionary way. I mean, that may be a stretch, thinking about how sometimes we don't need to go look at some exquisite technology. Sometimes we take the simple and apply it in a revolutionary new way. And the other thing this question made me think about, though, is just in how we manage complexity. And I think we are at a point an inflection point in history where we are better equipped to manage complexity. As we start looking at digital engineering tools, just a human is limited in our ability to manage complexities. As systems get more and more complex, as we try to think about this elephant of cruise missile defense, ABMS, we have to have these digital models to manage that complexity, or we will never get there.
I love it. So I love the thought of just revolutionary balloons, right? So managing complexity. Let me actually take this and drive it back to when we talk about best value, right? This came in just from the audience, and Mr. Wirt, you talked about best value, and the audience question is this: we have heard best value, the term best value, for years, but the new acquisition teams coming in do not seem to be in line with what this means, and there's a gap between customer needs and acquisition process that prevents progress to be made. How do we bridge these gaps? Any thoughts?
Well, I think I already talked about this. We have done best value acquisitions rather consistently. The idea is to define a threshold and then define an objective. And a great example of this was 3Dealer in the initial acquisition. The challenge we have with it is doing it in such a way that you don't end up driving to an overreaction, let's say. So what happened on 3Dealer is I can't talk about the source selection, but ultimately we end up awarding to an industry prime who was then unable to produce. So then we took a completely, Kevin's comment, we took a completely revolutionary approach to that program with demos out at Nellis and basically a non-competition competition situation that got us to a really good answer. So I do think we have to spend time thinking about what is the best way to actually do best value acquisition that doesn't drive industry all to one corner of the answer. I'm being a little vague because I can't really talk about what happens in source selection, but if you do it wrong, you can end up driving all of the competitors to a same answer that is unaffordable, or a same answer that's unawardable, etc. It's challenging.
And I would say you couldn't even have done what you did with 3Dealer 5-6 years ago. I mean, the fact that we have some new authorities, OTAs, MTAs, the tailored acquisition pathways. So there's recognition that one size doesn't fit all. And so we have some new tools that enable us to get after this in a different way than we have in the past. So, and I think there was another question in the chat about this, how do we get after some of these needs and not have to have things like competition and the normal acquisitions slow us down. And I do think there's been recognition that that's a problem, and we've been given new tools to utilize. We just have to be careful how we use them and not to abuse them so they're not taken away.
If I could, we also have new methods for requirements, right, that are companions to those acquisition methods, more capacity based, like the capability needs statement for software intensive efforts, things that let us start at a capacity level and manage that capacity, which we're going to need more in a software defined world. So I think the requirements, processes, tools, artifacts are also they're evolving in a way that we can have that conversation together and buy things incrementally. The other thing I would add is that we increasingly are seeing uses of demonstrations, risk reduction activities, experimentation, and helping us refine requirements, everything from refine requirements to help us make smarter choices about where we want to go. And I think we need to continue to employ those tools. Because I think it's a good venue for industry. I think it's a good venue for the government. I also think they're good venues for bringing our joint partners together as well. So there's a lot of methods, things that are evolving that make me hopeful.
Let me kind of go off of that. So that makes you hopeful. What are your biggest concerns? I'm going to go on mute.
I would say it's how I find the mute button and how I keep my lights in my office on here because they've gone off a couple times. But it's definitely that managing complexity. I mean, we make it sound easy, but it's a full contact sport. We've got to continue to have the forums where we work cross MAGCOMs, work with our command customers, our COCOM customers. We've got to have the forums where we're working across the acquisition community to make sure that we're handling the integration. And now we have the Space Force as well. And, a lot of what we're doing in the C2 realm is going to be heavily powered by the capabilities that they're bringing to the fight. So finding ways to bridge those chasms and responsibly manage our capabilities so the individual programs all show up at the same time and space and form an end-to-end mission capability for us. So there's where we have a lot of work to do together, and why we have sessions like what we've invited you to today. Over.
Love it. Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I will. I will. I don't worry a lot. Once we get on contract with one of our industry partners, that will make progress. And sometimes there are issues and we work through those, but largely I don't worry about that piece. What I really worry about is the pathways that Kevin mentioned. Those were put in place, but then largely what staffs tend to do is then add things. So we have a fast way on requirements with a rapid prototyping requirements document, doesn't have to go to the JROC, and we can launch a program as a mid-tier acquisition. But what's been happening is new requirements that you have to go to a mid-tier acquisition advisory board at the OSD level. There's additional reporting requirements being added. And really it's those things that over time accumulate, and whatever new authority we're given tends to become more and more like the old authorities that we live with. So that's my biggest worry.
So did I see you, General Murray, coming off mute?
Yeah, for me, and I could talk forever on this, I'll keep it really short. For me, as I've watched this process, the thing I worry most about is the transitions. And this may be an imperfect view of the process, but here's how it looks like from my foxhole. How does my ConOps transition into requirements? How do I get that into the JROC, right? And then how do I get stuff out of requirements? Because my sense is for these, again, we're talking about complex system of systems, single one-off things that everybody agrees we got to buy can move through the process quickly. But for these complex systems, when is my ConOps good enough to send it to the JROC? So, and then how do I get it out of the JROC so that I can get it to the acquisition folks? And then, the other thing that we see is there's a final transition there, and that is, when does that get transitioned to a service from the organized, train, equip piece? And when is that thing good enough to start training up people, building organization, comrails, squadron wings and groups, and everything that goes with that. And that has been the part that I found to be the most challenging as I work through this. Everybody in their piece of it's really good at it. It's the handoffs in between and keeping that moving quickly.
And I'll just offer one final thought here, but I guess what keeps me up at night is we've had to make some choices, and we've put a lot of eggs in some really important baskets, and this is across the whole Air Force, Space Force. We've put a lot of eggs in some key baskets, and those key baskets have to be successful, or we fail. And so those keynote programs have to be successful. The things that we're doing for General Maury and cruise missile defense, over the horizon radar, wow, it's got to be successful. We're depending on some of those key technologies to come through to be successful, or we're not going to get there. So.
No, thank you. So look, we're coming up on an hour. I knew this was going to go fast. It did go fast with all of you. What I'm going to do is very quickly just kind of hit some of the concepts that you so eloquently articulated to the group. Starting with Mr. Wirt, you're talking about in a high-end fight, we're going to be challenged before we even get out of garrison, and the government gets what the government incentivizes. I love that. The government gets what the government incentivizes. We want best value. Mr. Stamey talked about putting analytical rigor into the development of the OIs in general. And we don't have time to prepare exquisite tech. We rely on industry to get us tech that's ready to go, right? And the key word in OIs, as we all agreed, is that imperative. And the longer it takes, the more it costs. Mr. Vona talked about using the NDS as a guide. I think it's for industry, it's important to understand the overarching concept of why are we doing this in the first place, understanding what that NDS starts with. So ultimately we know where we're driving as a country. The commitment to the OIs and the COCOMs. I talked about perfect being the enemy of good enough, focus on what's good enough, and then iterate, and then eliminate complexity. Tenet of systems engineering 101. I haven't taken it, so now I'm adding it to my to-do list. And then General Murray talking about, hey, it's okay to build the bike while you ride it, but how do I get from ideation through production when the real challenge there is that transition between each of those steps? And then your three big ideas, General Murray, of integrated layer defense, persistent theater-wide domain awareness, and then persistent and proactive defense. There's a lot we covered here, and our hope is that for our participants, we had a great crowd today, some solid questions that came through, that you took something away from this and understand that there's a real partnership here between, no matter where you are, whether you're government, industry, academia, we're all moving in the same direction. And this type of dialogue is absolutely critical for us to be able to achieve our shared goals. So I want to wrap up with that and say thank you so much to all of our panelists for spending time. General Murray, I probably wish it was longer than an hour so you could stay in the sunlight. But I know you all spent time and were preparing for this. And so from the FCIA's Lexington Concord chapter, our sincerest thanks to all of you. And for those attendees, I do want to give a shout out. We have an upcoming Elmer Fuller Memorial Scholarship Golf outing on June 6th in 2023. And that'll be at the Marlboro Country Club in Marlboro, Massachusetts. So with that, wish you a great weekend and the rest of your afternoon or evening. Take care, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for moderating. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John.
You bet.
Kevin.
Thanks
And
for
to any participants who, Steve has my contact info. So if you have follow-on questions, I'm happy to do it. That's what I do for this command. So please get with him, get my contact, and happy to help out. That's it. We'll see you all later.
Well done, everyone.